off with the subject of Ukraine because events there are immensely important. Obviously, everything that's taking place in Ukraine and the war has huge ramifications for not only everybody in Europe, but also US and to some extent worldwide. And of course, the Western media getting very, very excited by the Ukrainian incursion over the northern border into Kursk territory. Now, the first thing to say to people, we'll come on to the Kyiv Post in just a second, but before we get to that, the important thing to say is that the region that the Ukrainians have gone into is largely open space, woodlands. It has a very, very small and well dispersed Russian population. And so essentially the Ukrainian forces have gone into an area where they're operating largely in small groups and dispersed amongst this very wide open space and forested area. So to some extent, this makes the Russian operation very difficult because although the Ukrainian troops are using mechanized equipment, the region itself suits relatively small groups hiding in these wooded areas. Nevertheless, what we're actually seeing on the ground is the Russians are now forming a comprehensive defense, and the Ukrainians have been taking particularly heavy losses. But the key point is propaganda from the Ukrainian side. I'm just going to bring on the Kyiv Post here. This is not to criticize them directly, but to say that even in this article, it's very difficult to actually pick up what's happening. They say 5 things worth knowing about Ukraine's Kursk offensive in Russia. If you look at the article itself, that's Russia reinforces the defensive position, drone swarms, Kursk 2024, and a lot of things that you didn't know about, which is talking about counter-terrorism in Chechnya. So there's not a lot of factual information in this thing. If I just bring in the next bit of text here, this is where the propaganda starts. Moscow is ransacking other frontline sectors for troops. This is totally untrue. The Russians have about 850,000 troops mobilized. They have an abundance of troops, and the troops that are being used to quell the incursion into the Kursk area, these are troops completely separate from the fighting in the Donbass region. To the contrary, it is Ukraine that is having to pull troops off the front line. And at the moment, what is happening is that the Russian forces are moving forward in many areas. This is simply not being discussed in the West. Let's have a look at the BBC getting very excited because the Ukrainians are stating that they've been using Challenger tanks in the Kursk incursion.
Challenger 2 tanks supplied by the UK to Ukrainian forces have been used in their cross-border incursion into Russia, a source has told the BBC. Kyiv says it's expanding its military operation in the Kursk region, and within the past hour or so, a top commander has said the country's troops advanced a further 1.5 kilometres in the past day. But Russia insists they are pushing back. Our correspondent Will Vernon has the latest.
In Russia, evacuations from parts of the border regions continue. Thousands of people have been forced to flee their homes. The Russian military is desperately trying to stop the Ukrainian advance, releasing more pictures allegedly of strikes against Ukrainian forces.
So there's a lot of nuances in that clip. Of course, there's the excitement that the British Challenger tank is apparently being used in the battle. This was one of the wonder weapons that was supposedly going to change the war for Ukraine alongside American equipment such as the Abrams tank. And the latest Western wonder weapon is the F-16 fighter, which is not going to arrive in sufficient numbers to change much on the battlefield. But he's also talking about alleged Russian attacks. Now, if there's one thing about the information that is coming out of the Russian Ministry of Defense and is also coming across many excellent social media analyst sites, is the use of Russian weapons to destroy heavy armour. This is a video of a destruction of a British Challenger tank. Let's let this video run, and you can see what is about to happen. So the first thing we're seeing is the power of the drones in surveillance and spotting armour, but also men operating. And there is no doubt that the Russians have far more drones and better capabilities. So the Ukrainians in this sector are really suffering from the attacks that are coming in from Russian drones. And if we have a look just very shortly in this clip, you will see the effect of one of the Russian drone strikes on this Challenger tank there that has gone into the woods to hide. There are many reports appearing that the Challenger tank is not faring well on the battlefield against modern weapons that the Russians are using, and has a propensity to explode and burn. So this is just one of the videos that the BBC is trying to call alleged attacks. The reality is that the Ukrainians are now really beginning to suffer from these attacks, and the number of Ukrainian troops being killed is climbing. The Ukrainians, we also need to say, are reinforcing the area. And this, many commentators are saying, is a disastrous action, because essentially they are going to be contained in the initial incursion area, and the Russians are then going to destroy these troops and their equipment bit by bit, as they are doing on the other areas of the front. The difference, I'll stress it again, is that the Ukrainians have pulled highly experienced, some of their best troops, off the Donbass fronts in order to take this, make this attack into Russia. What's the objective? It appears to hold territory up until the US elections, when the Ukrainians can use this as a bargaining chip for more money and weapons, and to show that the Western masters, that they're still capable of an attack on the Russians. So many military people are saying this is a very cynical attack, because it's a publicity stunt which is going to cost many lives. Now, I just want to come on to the subject of losses of Western and, we will say, possibly even UK servicemen and women inside Ukraine. There's been at least 4 major Russian attacks where the Russians have claimed that they have hit NATO personnel in Ukraine. This is a freedom of information sent to the Ministry of Defence in UK, 15th of August, saying, please advise how many British service personnel have died while carrying out duties in Ukraine since May 2022 to the date of this request. Please advise how many British service personnel have been injured while carrying out duties. Now, this is a very important question. Of course, the response here from the Ministry of Defence goes on to come up with all the usual statements. So they estimate they will take an additional 20 working days to make a final decision on where the balance of public interest lies. That doesn't mean to say they're considering what's best for the public. It means they're considering what is safest for the government. But the response goes on with a normal disclaimer. But I couldn't help but notice that there's no signature. So this is effectively an anonymous response from the Ministry of Defence. We will wait and see whether they declare who has been killed or injured and what the numbers are. Now, I just wanted to bring people's attention on to this. This is something that I've been thinking about it over a couple of days. But this is the definition of murder. This is taken from the CPS website. So in a case of murder, you've got to be of sound mind. You've got to kill somebody unlawfully, and that is any reasonable creature. That could be a human being. And it is going to take place under the King's peace, so it's not in wartime. And there's got to be an intent to kill. So effectively, this is the basic definition. We can also have a look at this. This is conspiring or soliciting to commit murder. Whosoever shall solicit, encourage, pursue, or endeavour to pursue, or shall propose to any person to murder any other person. Now, what I want to do is just get the audience thinking about this in relation to the conflict in Ukraine. And of course, if we put operations in the middle, we've effectively got a UK cabinet war against Russia. It's a proxy war being fought via Ukraine. So UK has not been attacked by Russia nor suffered any act of war. UK is not at war with Russia. And the UK has solicited, encouraged, persuaded, and endeavoured to persuade Ukraine and individuals in Ukraine to murder Russian civilians and military on behalf of the UK government. Russians are not subjects of His Majesty, nor are they within the King's dominions. So what I'm showing here is that we're not at war with Russia, and yet we are directly responsible for the killing of people. We, being the Cabinet Office in this country, should they be held accountable? And if we just bring this in, we can also now ask a question. If British Special Forces and servicemen are being killed in Ukraine under these circumstances, have they been unlawfully killed at the hand of the UK government? I'll leave our audience to consider this, but I'll just bring in reports that Charles Mallet made a couple of days ago, because here we've got the British government scrutinising people in this country, Tommy Robinson and Nigel Farage mentioned here, being scrutinised by the security services amid fears that Britain's far-right riots are being fuelled by the Putin regime. And we've also got the fact that specialist officers have been tasked with pursuing online offenders and so-called influencers responsible for spreading hate and inciting violence. This is while the killing goes on in Ukraine at the hand of the UK government and the Cabinet Office in particular. And Charles Mallet also highlighted here that there was additional parts that we needed to encourage, capable of encourage or assistance, intends to encourage or assistance commission of a serious crime.